welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Researchers have found that a 90-year-old woman in Belgium was infected with 2 different variants of the COVID-19 virus at the same time, in what was one of the first documented cases of its kind. The unvaccinated woman was admitted to hospital in the Belgian city of Aalst on the 3rd of March this year, following a number of falls. It was confirmed as being COVID positive on the same day. Now, is it possible that there are more of these dual COVID infections? Richard Branson has flown to an altitude of nearly 90 kilometers above the Earth in his Virgin Galactic rocket plane. It makes him the first of the space tourism entrepreneurs to enjoy a successful flight to space. The billionaire described the moment as an experience of a lifetime. When will space tourism become the new type of attraction for people? And the EU Foreign Affairs Council was chaired by the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Joseph Borrell. The Council discussed a variety of international issues, including the latest developments concerning Afghanistan, Ethiopia and Lebanon. The ministers also exchanged views on the geopolitics of new digital technologies. Can the ministers take decisive decisions on these international issues? So these are the top 3 stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. COVID-19 variants continue to spread all over the world. Our following infographic gives an overview of the spread of variants. Experts are warning that it is possible to catch 2 COVID variants at the same time after seeing a double infection in a 90-year-old woman who became sick with the alpha and beta types, first identified in the UK and South Africa.
A scientific congress and Belgian media said that a 90-year-old Belgian woman who died from COVID-19 in March had contracted 2 variants of coronavirus at the same time, which is believed to be the first documented case of its kind. The case discussed at this year's European Congress on Clinical Microbiology, Infectious Diseases shows that it is possible to catch 2 COVID-19 variants simultaneously. The statement said that the woman became sick with alpha and beta types, first identified in Britain and South Africa, and her doctors said that she could have contracted the infections from 2 different people. Belgian media said that the woman had not been vaccinated, while doctors believe that it was the first documented case of its kind, and although rare, similar dual infections are happening.
I'm now joined live from Bath in England by Dr. Bharat Pankhania, who's a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Dr. Pankhania, thank you once again for joining us here today on The Edge. Actually, there are several issues COVID-related to discuss today, but of course the first one is that of the woman who got a double infection of 2 different variants of COVID-19. Well, what does this actually mean? And is this something that we should be worried about? Is it something that could cause further problems down the line?
Well, it's a clear indicator of, if you will look, you will find. And in this case, it happened to be in Belgium, and therefore they have the capability of looking. And when they looked, they identified that the lady had 2 variants, and therefore it is clear, it is very clear, and it is important to also recognize that it is possible to have infections from more than 1 variant. And that makes biological sense. And the other thing is, this poor lady was infected in a given time by 2 different people with 2 different infections, which she then acquired.
And actually, what that speaks volumes about how careful people, carers especially, as well as visitors, have to be. That I'm sure that they were already being particularly careful because she's a 90-year-old woman, but obviously 2 people weren't as careful as they thought they were being. So there's a lesson to be learned from that, isn't there?
I absolutely agree with you, and it clearly indicates to us that this virus, the SARS-CoV-2, is very infectious. More so, it's more disease-causing and harmful to elderly people. And here is a very clear example of, despite whatever precautions they may have been taking or not, we don't know, it was possible to infect this elderly 90-year-old lady twice, both times from different variants.
And of course, the other important thing was that she wasn't vaccinated. So that's a key component here as well, isn't it?
Oh, indeed, indeed. And therefore, she had no protection whatsoever as a 90-year-old, and unfortunately went on to get severe disease and die. Vaccines do protect, and it is important to acknowledge that whether it's the alpha, beta, gamma, or delta variant, the vaccines are working and effective in preventing severe illness against all those variants.
This is an important thing to expand upon, because we've all become armchair experts in the last 18 months on infectious diseases. Apologies to the real experts like yourself. But some people are looking at the numbers that the media are throwing out and saying, well, this vaccine's only 64% effective, this vaccine's only 70% effective. What's the point? What's the truth?
Well, if we look back to when the World Health Organization was stipulating that we would like to invent a vaccine and its efficacy would have to be X, they said that if a vaccine is 50% effective, it is good enough. So we have invented a series of vaccines which are much more than 50% effective in preventing serious illness. So what we need to do is not look at the vaccine preventing infection, because we know that its best effect is at preventing severe illness. In other words, stops you from entering ITU and being put on the ventilator and not dying. And that efficacy is around the 75, 85 range. So the efficacy, despite the emergence of variants, is pretty high. On the other hand, this is where the 64% comes in, it is entirely possible to get an infection despite being fully immunized, but that infection is usually mild or moderate, and it doesn't result in you ending up in ITU.
And that, of course, we remember the scenes from not so very long ago with the ICUs being overflooded and people in America even scrambling for ventilators and so on and so forth. And that's obviously something that we want to avoid. And that's first world country. That's not to forget the less developed countries that don't have those privileges of ICUs. So what's this? I wasn't going to come there straight away, but since I mentioned it, let's go to the underdeveloped countries. Let's talk about what is the situation in places like Africa, in countries like Haiti, or war-torn countries like Yemen and Syria. they're not getting the vaccines. So what are our expectations there?
I feel this is a tragedy, and it hurts me a great deal as a public health doctor that I am seeing a tragedy in front of my eyes and I'm powerless. I feel absolutely powerless to do anything about it apart from having the privilege to talk to you, and hopefully a few 100,000 people will be listening. And that is, this is a dereliction of duty by the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, and the other richer nations. It really is a disgrace. We need to help. We need to do all we can to help all these poorer nations and make sure this is not a question of it will happen. We have to have a task force to make it happen, that vaccines are either manufactured or made available to these poorer countries in the rest of the world.
So what is the risk for the developed countries? You mentioned the US, the UK, the European Union. If they don't do anything and they say, we're all right, Jack, we've got our vaccinations, we're protected, the story doesn't end there, though, does it? Because they're putting themselves in tremendous risk in the future.
Indeed. So the immediate things that may happen are a lot of people will die, and they will die unnecessarily. The things that save Africa is it has a younger population, and a younger population is essentially protected from severe disease. But nonetheless, many Africans and many people in Yemen, Syria and other places, Afghanistan, will die. The other thing is that it may result in the emergence of variants. And if these variants emerge and are bypassing the vaccines that we're currently deploying, then you end up with going back to needing boosters to re-immunize urgently with a reformulated booster against a variant. And finally, it can also enter the animal population and become permanent in an animal population, in which case global control over many, many years will become that much more difficult.
Now, I know you've done many years of research into the spread of infectious diseases, and the one thing that the one pandemic that springs to mind alongside coronavirus, it was the Ebola pandemic, which frightened everybody because the symptoms of Ebola are just horrific, and yet that remained contained. Is that partly because the Ebola is less infectious, maybe, or its shelf life is shorter? I don't know how to put it. What are the differences between the two? Well, why has coronavirus got out of control? And as you say, if it goes into the animal population, that's a totally different game changer.
Yes, so we started with a very incorrect hypothesis that SARS-CoV-2 is a droplet spread infection. So we spent a lot of time and effort in cleaning surfaces and reassuring people incorrectly that it's droplet spread, and therefore if you are not within droplet range of the person, you're going to be okay. And that's why they were not talking about put those masks on. Right. When the realization dawned onto people that this is aerosol spread, we went down the wear your mask properly, improve ventilation, avoid being close to other people, so on. So SARS-CoV-2 is aerosol spread, and this is why we have millions of cases, because it is so infectious, it spreads through the air. On the other hand, Ebola was an infection, it still is an infection, which is from contact. It's contact of body fluids. It's not aerosol spread. If Ebola was aerosol spread, we would be in very big trouble. And one of the things that the WHO was very worried about is if the Ebola virus were to mutate and become aerosol spreading, it would cause a hell of a lot of death and destruction. But luckily, it hasn't done that.
Well, luckily it didn't follow the novelist's idea. There is actually a book that I've read where a scenario is taken and it is weaponized and turned into an aerosol. So let's hope that Ebola doesn't go down that route. It doesn't bear thinking of. Coming back to COVID-19, to SARS-2, and we're talking about the variants, and you mentioned at the very beginning with this example of a woman being receiving two different types of the variant is one that was documented, and I think the implication there was that, of course, this is happening all the time. It's not a unique case. How do medical services trace the variants in people? Are they following on from the blood tests that are being done for COVID? What's happening? How does that work?
Oh, it's very easy, and we have the technology. So what we do is we take a sample, and having taken the sample from the person, we are doing genomics to identify variants. And when we are doing genomics, it equals taking a sample and then working out the genome, i.e. what makes up that virus's genetic code. Mm-hmm. And when you start doing genomic studies, you suddenly identify, lo and behold, I have two separate genomes here simultaneously. That's what's happened. So the action really was, I wonder what she had that caused her to die. So they were doing a genomic, and when they were doing a genomic study, it turned out that actually she's got two infections.
Oh, interesting. So, let's talk UK. In the UK, are all COVID cases traced to see which variant they're from, or is it just a random selection thereof?
No, it has to be a random selection because it's very labor intensive and time consuming. So you wouldn't want to do genomic studies on all your confirmed cases, because what is the point? That what you should be doing as a surveillance measure is doing a representative sample of genomics, so that you're always watchful in case you suddenly unearth an unusual genomic. And then that tells you that there is something different here. And if it goes on to become dominant, like the Kent one beforehand, or the Delta variant from India currently.
Well, this is fascinating because again, mathematics is coming back into the research basis, and there was another conversation I had another day. But it's remarkable just how everything is being kept track of, and these new vaccines are being discovered. Today in the UK was was a day that many people were waiting for the announcement from the UK government about what would be happening with Freedom Day come on the 19th, on the revised date, the 19th of July. I think maybe the government's going to be describing it as Calculated Risk Day rather than Freedom Day. That's warning us that we should expect more infections and deaths as we normalise, and this will, I'm sure, will be true in every country around the world. What is bearing in mind that countries all around the world, including Turkey, America and France, everywhere, need to find a normal life into the future. What is the realistic way to begin to move forward?
Well, we have identified that vaccines do the job, and they do the job very effectively. And therefore, a highly vaccinated population will be a protected population. So the way forward is immunize. And once you have an immunized population, you are in safer zone. In the meantime, also continue with infection control measures, which is wear a mask, wear it properly, wear a higher specification mask, like a FFP2 mask. Furthermore, in crowded places, either avoid them or wear a mask, and also in crowded places, invest some money in improving ventilation. We can return back to normality, we will return back to normality, but in the meantime, we have to take a series of what I would call slices of infection control measures, which then protect us and put us in a good position. One of them is vaccines. The other one is good quality masks. The third one is ventilation. The fourth one is avoid crowds. The fifth one is avoid a wide circle of friends with people that you don't know who are not immunized or you're not immunized. And when you put all those measures together, you get a very well protected population.
So that gives us a chance to move forward. Now, we know all about masks. Sadly, some people after 18 months still haven't worked out how to position it on the face. So that should be a simple one to follow through. Hopefully they will learn. But ventilation, in the summer, of course, this is an easy thing to do. We just open our windows and let the beautiful sunshine in. I'm sure even in England, you're still having lots in sunshine. But in public places, ventilation issues, does that mean that buildings should be investing in air conditioning systems, or what's the thought with that?
Well, we don't want to spend a lot of money unnecessarily. So simple solutions work. And the simplest of simple solution is to accept what we need to do, which is dilute the number of particles in a given area, in a room, for example, or in a corridor. So how do you dilute them? Is you have a supply of more and more air coming in from outside, diluting these particles. That's all you need to do. In other words, you have a fan which is bringing in fresh air from outside and pushing it into that room and diluting the number of particles for a given time. That is the simplest measure. Air conditioning systems, etc., are expensive and require a lot of re-engineering of the building, whereas bringing in fresh air, forced fresh air into a closed room, a small room, corridors, etc., is an easy thing to do, and it is achievable.
In fact, it's also probably much healthier than having refrigerated air pumped at you, to have the real natural, original fresh stuff. Now, we've seen scenes over the weekend of people with big smiles on their faces, cheering, some crying perhaps, with the sports events that have been going on with Wimbledon, some terrific finals this weekend, as well as the Euro 2020 final yesterday. Of course, the Italians very happy with that. But are these sports events, should we be concerned about how they were carried out? Will they be giving us lessons for how we should be moving forward, and maybe looking just in a fortnight's time to the Olympics?
Yes, we are, and there are a number of researchers looking exactly into this. So there will be people busy now watching what happens after Euro 2020 crowd gatherings yesterday in London and other parts of the country. So we look and we hope that we don't have a huge spike in number of cases in the next 2 weeks. And there is a learning around it. In other words, it is possible, with the cooperation of the spectators and the organizers, of doing it safely. I know it can be done. The issue, and I think the big issue, is exuberance and alcohol. I think exuberance and alcohol allow you to drop your guard. And when you've dropped your guard, mistakes happen and infections are spread.
So it all comes down at the end of the day to somehow enjoying yourself but staying responsible. So on that note, just in our last minute, how can you summarise for us what are the key things that everybody should have done by now and should be doing into the future?
Well, the most important bit is vaccines protect you. Please go and get yourself immunized. And if you are not immunized, you need to reduce your circle of human-to-human connections. Ideally, stay outside. Ideally, avoid crowds. closed spaces, poorly ventilated places. And that is all the measures you need to take. And where you end up in a crowded bus, train, tube, etc. for a short period of time, wear a mask, wear a good quality mask, and wear it properly.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Bharat Pankhania, thank you so much for joining us today on The Edge and sharing a wide breadth of knowledge. Thank you. The recent findings about the COVID-19 virus show that there are still things to learn about the virus and that people should comply with precautionary measures until people around the globe are immunized so that we don't turn back to the days seen at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, with a look outwards, space travel, once reserved for rival superpowers, is now available to anyone who can afford it. Our following infographic gives an update on the latest developments regarding space tourism. British billionaire Richard Branson has reached space aboard his own winged rocket ship in his boldest adventure yet.
British billionaire Richard Branson set off on July 11 for space as his Virgin Galactic rocket plane soared more than 50 miles above the New Mexico on the vehicle's first fully crewed test flight to space.
We are armed for release. 20 seconds.
Branson, one of 6 Virgin Galactic holding employees strapping in for the flight, has touted the mission as a precursor to the new era of space tourism, with the company he founded poised to begin commercial operations next year. Sunday's high-altitude launch of the VSS Unity rocket plane marks the company's 22nd test flight of its Spaceship Two system and its 4th crewed mission beyond Earth's atmosphere. It is also the first to carry a full complement of space travelers, 2 pilots, and 4 mission specialists, Branson among them.
Before bringing the nose down.
The gleaming white spaceplane was borne aloft attached to the underside of a specially designed twin fuselage carrier jet VMS Eve, named for Branson's late mother.
Nose gear touchdown.
I'm now joined from Kiel in England by Dr. Jacco van Loon, who's an astrophysicist at Kiel University. Dr. van Loon, thank you for joining us today here on The Edge. Now, the trip into the edge of space by Richard Branson was the first commercial trip of its sort. What is the special significance of yesterday's journey?
Yes, thanks for having me. Well, your program, The Edge, as you say, is quite appropriate because you know we're reaching the lowest parts of Earth's orbit where you can send people to and claim that they are in space. And so, although this was not yet a commercial flight, this was a test flight. Richard Branson has been very keen in making it affordable for people to travel into space and get that experience. And so the altitude that they reached, a bit above 80 kilometers, that's where you can experience the sensation of being far above the planet Earth, as well as being weightless for a couple of minutes. So the test went well, and so they are ready to carry tourists into space, and that will happen probably next year. So people have already been lining up and paying for tickets. So the tickets that Richard Branson is selling are relatively affordable, but of course only for people that have the money. That's what gives them the edge over, for instance, Jeff Bezos, which is auctioning. This is basically the idea that Richard Branson always has had to make things affordable, including space flights. He has, of course, run an airplane company before already, and he's very, very keen to share experiences with people. So you can call that democratization of space, but of course, many people will still not be able to afford to fly into space.
Indeed. I'm not planning on buying a ticket quite yet, but who knows? As you say, Branson has a long history of in the entertainment industry, let's say, let alone travel. So he well understands his potential customers and has possibly a different vision than the others. Who Bezos doesn't have that sort of background, and Elon Musk is coming probably from a slightly different perspective, from the achievement of travel in itself for its own right, I imagine. So we've got these three different players here. That must make it even more of an exciting mix.
Yes, of course, that's been a few decades since these people have been working on making space available. But they're all charismatic people, with a lot of flair and show. And so you saw that Richard Branson put up a show. And indeed, he had Virgin Media Records, and so he had musicians there as well. So the fact that there are at least these three neck-to-neck competitors helps a lot. Of course, they have to be extremely careful because it's very risky, and so they've been really paying attention to doing tests, make everything safe before they will actually have paid customers to fly. But the fact that they're all working on this in different ways with different technology is very exciting, because it's not just about tourism, even though for them that's of course income, but it's also to make it possible to do things in space and in the solar system that will otherwise be difficult or very slow in the developments if you just rely on, for instance, agencies like NASA and ESA to develop that.
Well, and that's a very important point, because a lot of people, if we look at the headlines, a lot of people are very angry that these three entrepreneurs are opening up this big ticket, high value trip of a lifetime, when there are people around the world who are starving, the climate is in disarray. Well, what are the benefits the wider benefits for humanity, for science in these new advancements?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question, and it is a very controversial issue. On the one hand, you have these wealthy entrepreneurs that can afford all these kinds of things that are very exclusive, and at the same time on the Earth we are tackling global problems like poverty and climate change, etc. If you look, for instance, at people like Bill and Melinda Gates, they also accrued a lot of wealth, but they have used that to make positive change on Earth. So now this is controversial. You might not agree with accumulating wealth just by individuals, but on the other hand, you must admit that there can be positive effects as well. And if more and more people go into space, they will share that unique experience of looking down on the planet, and they will come back and are likely to be investing into making the planet a better place to live on. And so that's a good spin-off from that, as well as the technology. Not just the technology for spaceflight, but when you develop technology, it just drives technology in a more general sense. And we need technology to also combat global problems. If you think about climate change, it's very difficult to just change our behavior, even though that might be the best solution. And we're still looking for technological ways of, for instance, capturing carbon, etc. That's not what they're testing now, but it's just all part of driving technological development. And this also inspires people, to think a little bit beyond the horizon and to look for things that perhaps are not possible yet, but they see that if you work hard on it, it can become possible.
So in a sense, there are two sides to it. On the one hand, there's the touchy-feely spiritual awakening potential of a trip onto the edge of space that can turn somebody's life around and make them realize that they've got to do something for Mother Earth that they hadn't planned on doing previously. But also thinking back to way back to the 60s and 70s, the Apollo missions, people I'm sure then had very much the same criticisms of the money that was being spent on space travel, that what is it for? But space travel, space exploration and the technological developments has of course brought us many other scientific benefits.
Yes, exactly. Actually, the Apollo program used a huge fraction of the national GDP compared to now, when actually it's quite a small fraction compared to, for instance, what's invested in social security, health, military, etc. So at that time, it was not just unprecedented, but it's never been repeated, the amount of investment that was made, of course, to do something very bold in a very short amount of time. And it was the result of competition, political competition, and now it's more commercially driven as well as political, between the space agencies, like between US, Russia, China, etc. So although the amount of investment actually at the moment is not as large in absolute terms, of course there's still a lot of money going into this, and you can ask the question whether that's worth it. And indeed, looking at the Apollo program, it was worth it, again, because it inspired so many people, and people are still talking about it. So that already says something, and it just got people to become much more ambitious and innovative, and that is what really makes all the positive change on Earth. Not going to the moon and back in itself, but what it drives in society. It's part of our human nature to this is why we are here the way we are. We've come a long way since we lived in the caves, but it's all part of human nature to develop things, to solve problems, and to be creative. It's on the one hand, it's very technological, but on the other hand, it's also very, very creative and using your imagination, and that's what drives this too. You don't have to be a scientist to be inspired by space technology. Oh,
absolutely, and to look back on planet Earth, you just have to be a human to appreciate the vastness of it. Well, I'm sure that all three of our entrepreneur friends are looking for great slogans. Unfortunately, To Infinity and Beyond is already taken, but I'm sure they'll be working on it. Jaco van Loon, thank you so much for joining us today here on The Edge. It's been fascinating speaking with you. Thank you. So Richard Branson became the first person to ride into space aboard a rocket he helped fund. It seems as if space tourism will become the new attraction for people who can afford it. With an estimated 446 million residents, the European Union is an international organisation which currently has 27 member states. Our following infographic has more facts about the Union and its importance in the international arena. The EU's foreign ministers have met in Brussels to discuss the humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia as well as Afghanistan and a number of other foreign policy issues.
The European Union foreign ministers met on Monday to discuss the group's position on foreign affairs. The meeting will give the ministers opportunities to receive updates and react to the latest developments concerning Afghanistan, the South Caucasus and Lebanon. The meeting will then continue with an exchange of views on the geopolitics of new digital technologies, Ethiopia and the strategic compass. European foreign affairs ministers were also set to discuss the conflict and famine situation in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia, we will demand the humanitarian access, especially to Tigray, where we can see coming famine that will be devastating, like in the 80s. So I really hope there will be a strong message from the Council.
Ministers are also expected to approve conclusions on the globally connected Europe and on the EU's priorities at the 76th General Assembly of the United Nations.
The world is facing a number of international crises in countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Ethiopia and Lebanon. And international organisations like the European Union should take their responsibility to solve these problems, to prevent civilian casualties and ensure the necessary humanitarian support. We hope that the EU Foreign Ministers meeting can be the first step to improvement. So our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's have a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top stories shared with the hashtag Virgin Galactic. And here's what you had to say on Twitter about Virgin Galactic. Tommy says, I have mixed feelings about Richard Branson's spaceflight. 1, it belittles what being a true astronaut is. 2, this is only for the 1% privileged people. 3, money could better be spent on social services programs. 4, living wages for workers, anyone? Opinions? George Whiteside says, today was the result of years of work and enormous sacrifice by many. Each and every person who's been a part of the Virgin space story deserves thanks. Increased spaceflight will change humanity's future for the better. Your efforts have made that happen. And Jim Shull says, today is another step toward the dream of spaceflight. Let's now take a look at our video today in which the World Food Programme calls on billionaires to help fight hunger.
When human beings set their mind to it, we can achieve incredible things. Our hope, ambition, and innovation have made it possible to literally reach for the stars. Looking down on our planet from space offers a unique view on humanity. We only have one Earth, and we need to take care of it and take care of each other. As the world's billionaires buckle up for space travel, we challenge them to bring that unique perspective back and help us fight hunger on this planet.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.